Welcome everyone to a really exciting webinar that we're going to have today with Brandon Hickey, the new currency, how credit models accelerate growth. The chat is open, so if you want to drop into chat who you are and where you're from, that would be great. We're going to give people a couple of more minutes to filter in before we actually dive into the webinar itself. And we're planning a really dynamic conversation today. So this will not be a PowerPoint death march kind of day. It will be a lot more fluid and moving than that because Brandon, who I've known, Brandon, how long have I known you? 10, 15?
15 years, 14 years, quite a while.
Yeah, a long time. Back from your OpenView days, right?
Yeah, we first met, I think, probably in the earlier part of my OpenView days. You exposed me to some of the stuff you had done with the Leverage Point team. And you're one of the people that got me interested in pricing, actually.
I'm not sure if I need to beg your forgiveness or just to take credit for it. Um, Give people one more minute to filter in, and then we'll get started. Okay, well, I'm an impatient kind of guy, and we are recording, so let's get started. So, um, October, final quarter of the calendar year. Everyone is extraordinarily busy trying to pull their numbers together. So we really thank you for taking some time this morning or this afternoon if you are in Europe for what I think is going to be a critical session, a really important session on one of the topics that is dominating pricing conversations these days, at least pricing conversations in the B2B SaaS, business AI, and agentic AI worlds. And that is the emergence of credit models as a way to price. Let's go on to the next slide. So we are really fortunate to have with us today Brandon Hickey. Brandon, I think, brings a unique perspective to this. I'll let him introduce himself in a moment. But Brandon brings a unique perspective in that he is responsible for monetization at LinkedIn, which everyone knows. But it's not just that. He also looks at a lot of different companies, a lot of different monetization and pricing models, and provides guidance to people and is one of the few people in the world that I know that really understands credit-based pricing, how it works, how it can fail, and what you need to do to make it work. So I'm looking forward to a really great conversation this morning. Brandon, you want to say a few words to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Stephen. Yeah, so as Stephen was saying, I lead monetization for our talent solutions business at LinkedIn, specifically focusing on the product side of things. And I'm also a venture partner at Companion Ventures, which is a Series A stage investor that focuses on investing in B2B software and AI solutions. And specifically, we invest in the range of a 1 to 3 million run rate and are looking at companies that are in the range of tripling revenue year over year. And so we've invested in a number of pretty exciting software players across the market, everything from Fullcast to Posh to Civil and to Flex.io. Those are some of the higher flyers in the portfolio right now.
Great. And so just a couple of words about myself, Stephen Forth, one of the founders of Ibica, a deep pricing geek. Learned my chops with Tom Nagel, the author of The Strategy and Tactics of Pricing, and have been applying them really in the B2B SaaS world and over the last few years in the business AI world to help companies use pricing, packaging, and value to accelerate growth. And I think of pricing as a design problem. So pricing is not about primarily about optimization. It's not primarily about what number you put on the price tag. It's what you put the price tag on. And as part of that, I lead the mid-sized design thinking group on LinkedIn, where I frequently introduce pricing-related themes. I think sometimes bewildering people, but pricing is essential to how you go about really communicating and getting the value back from your innovations. And I really think it's innovation that has driven this current shift towards credit-based pricing. But before we dive into that, let's go on to the next slide. So we're going to start with a poll. Then we're going to talk about some of the basics. What is an agent? The term agent is used lots of different ways. I'd like to get Brandon's take on what he thinks the term agent means in the world we live in today. What we mean when we say credit-based pricing. Why people are moving to credit-based pricing for agents. Who's doing a good job with this? Because some are and some aren't. Different ways to think about the design of credit-based pricing models, what can go wrong, and will credits extend? So a couple of provocative questions. Will credits extend across companies and ecosystems? Could, for example, Salesforce Agentforce introduce a general credit pricing model for all of the different agents from all the different providers it integrates? And general thoughts to finish off of what might happen next. It's been a wild year. This is the year that vibe coding was introduced. Just to give you a sense of the change, it's hard to imagine life without vibe coding today, or at least hard for me to imagine life without vibe coding today. What on earth is going to happen next? But let's dive in with a quick poll to get people's, see where people are. So, unfortunately, I am not allowed to take the poll. And I'll tell you afterwards, after we get the answers, where I sit in my own personal journey on developing credit-based pricing for an initiative that Ibica has called Value IQ, which is a family of agents that help with value-based selling, value-based pricing, deal pricing, pricing design, and so on. And we are using credit-based pricing for Value IQ. So we'll give it just a little bit more time for a few more responses to come in.
Did you want to have a guess, Stephen or Brandon?
It's always tricky. I would say that the majority of people here will be either investigating or considering.
Okay.
And there will be relatively few who have actually implemented yet. But Brandon, what do you think?
I think it depends on how you define it. I think a lot of companies have seat-based models with crediting built on top of it. I don't think that's uncommon. So I think if you include that in, you're going to see a lot more on the implemented side. But if you're really talking about full-on consumption models, I think you'll be more where you're at.
Yeah, I think, well, we'll see. I would include the seat-based, the hybrid approaches of seat-based plus credits in the implemented slide. But Liam, should we take a peek
Yeah.
at the results? Oh, Brandon is right. More people at implemented than I would have expected. Okay. So it just shows that Brandon is in better touch with the market than I am. As we prepared for this webinar, we went out and did a mini survey on the most common objections to credit-based pricing. And the five that really came up were familiarity. So people just are not familiar with credit-based pricing models, and as a result, there's resistance to using them. Predictability, with credit-based pricing, it can be difficult to predict cost if you're the buyer, revenue if you're the vendor. Complexity. Credit-based pricing models are seen to be more complicated than other models. There are revenue recognition issues, and some people see and dismiss them as just a disguised way of doing cost-based pricing. It's kind of interesting to see this by role. So what the responses were by role. So salespeople are primarily concerned with familiarity and predictability, and to some extent complexity. With RevOps, you start people getting more concerned with revenue recognition issues. Product people are primarily concerned with predictability and complexity. The CFO cares, and finance. I said CFO here. It's actually the finance function. Are more concerned with revenue recognition. And it was really only the pricing people that cared about that this was disguised cost-based pricing. If I had not polled pricing people, that would not have really surfaced as an issue. But hey, I'm a pricing guy. So, Brandon, before we move on, any thoughts on this?
It doesn't surprise me. I think this is rapidly changing. I think with the likes of OpenAI, Gemini, Clay, Agentforce, adopting different formats of consumption models, it's becoming more of a household thing to talk about in a business, and most IT departments and finance have been exposed to it for years. So I think this is actually going to move rapidly towards understood. It may have some of the complexities to it, but people understand how to operationalize it to remove some of those challenges. I think that's why you see more people starting to implement and investigate it, because there's just more willingness to have the conversation at the table.
So let's go on then. And before we dive in, Brandon, what on earth are agents? We use this word all the time, but I'm not sure that we all understand it in the same way.
Yeah, so I think people do define it slightly differently. I think for the purposes of this conversation, how I'm defining it is a logic-based system that autonomously drives a workflow and the decisions associated around it. That means it takes in its environmental factors and has reasoning tied to it. And that's pretty different from an assistant, where an assistant is prompted to do an action. And assistants are typically pre-programmed. They can be agents too, but you also see things like RPA bots that are playing the role of the assistant. And so I think that's a really important point of differentiation to be aware of.
Yeah, so there's a difference between an assistant like ChatGPT, or the assistants that are cropping up on everybody's website, so that when you first interact with them, and an actual agent that has awareness of its environment, logic, and some ability to act built in. So, and that's really, it's the emergence of agents and the agent economy that I think anyway has been one of the things that has primed the pump for credit-based pricing models. But going on to the next question then, what is credit-based pricing? What are we talking about here?
Yeah. So credit-based pricing is anything that has a capacity limit or a meter for consumption or outcome tied to the billing model. So you'll see lots of different variants of this. Like I mentioned earlier, the most common version that you see in the market is a hybrid model with a seat with some sort of limit on capacity or usage. But you see things as far extending as outcome-based models that are purely pay on delivery or purely based on consumption. And then you'll also see things in the middle that will be base plus models where you'll have some sort of accelerator in between. And I think a lot of people are moving towards that middle world. And I think that's why Stephen's so excited to talk about this, and that's why I am. I think some of the things to think about are what set the stage for credit-based pricing, and what are some of the markets that have defined that. And some of the ones that I think about are infrastructure, APIs, and gaming. Those are three areas that have really defined the landscape of how you can think about credit-based pricing. And so as we get into things, I may reference some of those.
Yeah, and just as a sort of general note, I think that the game developers and the game designers, who are often designing whole virtual economies inside their game worlds, they're way ahead of many of us when it comes to thinking about the design of these things. I think there's a lot that we can learn from game design. That in itself would be a really interesting webinar, Liam, that we should try to pull together. But Brandon, is there anything that you've learned from looking at the game designers, or what are some of your favorite games, by the way?
So I'm not a gamer personally,
Okay.
but I got involved with a company that was trying to mobilize an operating system for tokens
Hmm.
for the gaming system through Companion. It's called Beamable. And I got to learn just about the power of virtual currencies and how it was moving back and forth. And the problem with gaming that I learned in interacting with the team is that specifically in the gaming world, it's about creative. Creative is what drives engagement. It's what drives a great design. It's not about the fundamentals on the back end. And so that tends to be something that's a requirement to make money, but it's not what makes a game good. And so being able to split that piece off from the back end is actually a really powerful thing. And so as you start seeing that, I'll probably refer to this later when we talk about where the market might be moving. But this idea that that becomes a new piece of the tech stack, I think is one of the areas that gaming is starting to show. We'll see how it takes off. But you see things even like Fruit Ninja that are using it on the back end. So bigger games. And I think it just allows the creative to play in their space. And I think that's what brings the magic to any sort of content that's out there.
Super interesting. Yeah, I hope we have a chance to dig into that a bit more over the course of the morning. But let's go on. So we talked about this a little bit already, but what's pushing this move to credit-based pricing for agents? Why are we? Well, first of all, do you agree that this is a trend? I think we do agree on that, but should confirm that. And if so, why is it happening and why now?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and it's really timely. I think there's four factors here that are driving the interest and movement here. The first one is it's a flexible way to align price to value, where there's a large variance in use cases to an application and large variance in usage or value that can be delivered through it. The reason that becomes compelling is it removes the old age problems of segmentation, where you have 1,000 different permutations of SKUs and the flexibility to get to market faster and to adjust.
Ju-
The second, go
I
ahead,
was just
Stephen.
going to note, you've just described exactly why Value IQ moved to credit-based pricing. I have to get you to repeat that so I can put it in our investor deck. But
So the second one is the fact is there's a cost structure. So there's margin implications, and margin implications in itself doesn't lead you to a usage-based pricing model or consumption. But the fact that you have wild growth with consumption and it's unpredictable how fast it may grow creates risk in getting to margin. And so with that, finance is more open to the idea, and so is revenue, even when historically they may have been more cautious about a move in that direction. And so I think that's opening the table to a discussion on it. The third is I started to mention this earlier, which is the deployment of new workflows is a lot easier in a credit-based system because you don't have to SKU something new. You don't have to build a new bundle. You actually just allow the new feature to consume from it, but you also can sunset it. And so I think that's a very powerful thing when you think about how long it takes someone to launch a new SKU. It allows you to get to market overnight. So this idea of like continuous deployment that Google made famous with the Google search engine, that actually becomes possible for any of your AI applications in this world. You no longer have the 16, 20-week delay to get SKUs and different things set up. It allows a free and flexible way to deploy. And then the last one I mentioned earlier, which was just around household names. When you start seeing Salesforce, you see OpenAI, and all these companies make people comfortable with application-based software being built around credits or common currency systems. It just makes it easier to have the conversation with a customer because they've already experienced how to buy that way. They know the fears and they know some of the risks. They know the challenges. one of the things you have to deal with a lot of times is dealing with how do you actually operationalize it? What is required of a customer to manage that? And we can get into that a little bit later when we talk about some of the like gotchas behind here.
Yeah. So I think you're right, Brandon, that this is because people are becoming more and more familiar with this. Um, Still in my day-to-day work, I am getting pushback from product leaders at some of Ibica's customers and in conversations. Last week there was an amazing session put on called Pricing Week, and credit-based pricing came up a number of times in Pricing Week, and that particular audience was not as familiar with. I was a diverse audience, but it was not. People were not as familiar with credit-based pricing as had kind of expected them to be at this point in time. But as you say, stuff is changing rapidly. Uh, so let's go on and continue the conversation. So you mentioned a number of companies that are sort of getting a lot of attention. They're setting the standard, perhaps. But who do you think is doing a great job at credit-based pricing?
Yeah, so I have a couple of them here. I'm not going to rattle all of them off because I think there's a lot of really innovative stuff happening right now. But I'm going to try to focus on a couple of themes that I see appearing with some of the leading players. And so the first one I'm going to mention is Clay. So Clay built this from the ground up. And one of the beauties of that is how elegant the solution has become because they didn't have the legacy basis that they were building on top of or the problem of trying to migrate customers to something new. But what Clay does is they sell a bundle of credits that can be used across their AI tasks, and they've commonized currency, and they've built different prices for different workflows in order to get to a single credit system. I think everyone can probably remember the telephone saga that we all went through, where you had different numbers of credits for texting, for different numbers of minutes, and then you had data for your storage. It was super painful. Well, Clay has solved that through a common currency. And because they started from the ground up, I think they've made that easier to do. And it's become very, very elegant. They also proved that you didn't need to be a big warehouse type company to actually go after this and do it. The second, I think, is really in transition. And so the second one I think about is Zendesk. It was a company that was really on the outs. It had been bought by a PE firm. It was in trouble in a lot of ways, and it reinvented itself with AI. And what I love about what they did is how they actually leveraged their platform position to transition themselves as the agent of choice. And one of the ways that they did that that I thought was really interesting was allowing flexibility to transition from their seat costs that a customer had with them into the AI resolutions that they could prepay for in capacity and spend down against, and then move back. So it removed the risk of actually testing AI to solve a problem that you weren't sure it could solve. And it gave you the flexibility to move both ways. Then I also look at companies like a ServiceNow. So ServiceNow has been around a long time. ServiceNow is like the definition of having large variance in use cases. People use it for a million different things. And I think what they've done well is they stayed true to their core in building like a model that allowed for the user access, but they've capacity tiered it in a really elegant way. And so I look at ServiceNow in that way. And then the last one I'd show off here is I actually think Gemini is doing some cool stuff.
Mhm.
So OpenAI brought the tokening system to the market. They started the input-output tokens and maybe really made it a standard. But what Gemini is doing is taking its portfolio products and layering it together through bundles and trying to leverage where they're at in the market with things like Drive, and they're incorporating it into the solution. And what you can see is they're building integrated workflows across. And they're also doing that to create a freemium sensation to move their people who are most likely to adopt AI in their ecosystem and move them through faster. And then the last one I'll give you here is just like the way that OpenAI is credit capping in driving you to upgrade. I don't know if any of you have tried to create images. It's the most frustrating thing in the world, but it's brilliant. You create 3 images, and the next thing you know, you're stalled for 24 hours. It's like a real need when you want to do something fast, and like that's a real low level use case that everyone does, but it's something that immediately catches you.
Yeah. Just on that last point, early on in this journey, I gave my granddaughters access to one of my the AI accounts, and they burned through my credits in a few hours, forcing me to upgrade because I actually needed the system for other purposes. Um, I think I have some comments about some anti-patterns too, but we have a place to discuss that. So that was super interesting. I had not thought about Zendesk the way you described it, and I think you're right. There's some very important lessons for us all to learn, especially companies that already have an existing pricing program, in how you flexibly introduce that. That was a super interesting point. And I'm going to have to study that more. Maybe if we have time towards the end, you can expand on that a bit. But let's go on. So, here's where the rubber meets the road, right? How do you actually go about designing a credit-based system? This is, I think, more complex than, you know, than designing a simple per user or a simple consumption-based system. And I think it's when people were raising complexity as an objection, I didn't dive into this as much as I should have in the survey, but I think that the product people were more concerned about the complexity of designing the system. The salespeople were more concerned with the complexity of explaining the system. And then the finance people were more concerned with the complexity of correctly implementing the system so it wouldn't muck up their finance. Let's lead here though, Brandon, because I think you've got you're at heart, I think there's a lot of product guy in you. So why don't we start talking about the design of credit-based pricing systems from a product point of view?
Yeah, happy to. I want to call out that I think one of the most important things is how you actually stage decisions and structuring your design. And one of the things that really is important there is just defining the currency itself. Like, what is the baseline metric that you work with? And so I think that's one of the areas that is worth delving in a little bit deeper. And we'll talk about some of these in the gotchas section. But one of the things people believe is the holy grail is outcome. And the reality is outcome is really hard to measure and hard to agree on with the customer. And so trying to get that unit of measurement right early is really important. And essentially what you're trying to understand is, all right, what does your application do for someone? And how does it achieve that? But what you want to be careful of is you want the flexibility of your AI suite to grow. And so what you want to do is ask yourself that question and ask where you'll be in 3 years. And I think in doing that, you understand what are the degrees of freedom you need to design into how your credit system works. So you open the doors to common currency, you open the doors to using the metric system, so it works for all the applications that could be across your suite. And so a good example here is if a company was talking about customer support, but knew longer term it might be getting into other workflows. Well, defining something as a resolution could actually be challenging because that means you're going to be introducing a new credit system as you get into another space. But if that's where you're going to play, that's fine. So let's take a case like Salesforce. Salesforce knows that's not the only space they're going to play. Salesforce has to think about the flexible crediting going into their sales economy, going into the different parts of their marketplace. So it could be challenging if they went there. And you can probably remember that's how they came to market with Agentforce, but they actually took a step back and they went to flex credits. The reason that's important is they acknowledge the fact that, hey, longer term, different use cases are going to show up in our marketplace. Hey, I might want to build an app store at some point. Hey, I might want to do these things. And so the person behind the scene has to be thinking 3 steps ahead of the market. So I think that's one of the real important design considerations. Stephen, I'll pass it back to you, and then I can go into some of the others. But I think
No,
that's the most important one to start with.
I completely agree, and it's not easy. Um, you know, I it's not easy to think through this and get to the right level of granularity and the right general approach to have this common currency. Uh, so one of the things that I've been spending a lot of time on lately is using generative AI in order to generate pricing models. And I have to say that in the first year I spent doing that was relatively unsuccessful. We've had great success in using generative AI to generate value models. We've had reasonably good success around deals and deal pricing and value stories, but the actual pricing model um, we struggled with. I think we've had a bit of a breakthrough this week, but it's still for very conventional pricing models. And the next thing I want to do is to see how I can train and structure a generative AI to help with this first piece, which is, what is a common fungible credit currency across multiple applications and multiple ways of driving value? What does that look like? So to me, that's if you solve that, a lot of the rest of the stuff I think is more mechanics, but I could be being naive. So let's go on and look at some of the other issues that you have to address.
Yeah. So I think some of the
Oh
other
no, sorry.
issues.
Yeah, stay on that slide. Thank you,
Oh,
Ian.
yeah. I think some of the other issues that you're going to need to address is how you think about consumption. Is it a capacity model versus is it a consumption model where you pay on delivery? And how do you structure that consumable? Is it use it or lose it? What does that look like? Does it expire in a month? Does it expire in 12 months? How does that influence Rev Rec and how they're going to be able to realize? How does that impact your cash flow? So, especially a lot of the people that Stephen works with tend to be earlier stage businesses. It's one of the groups I work with. Cash flow is king. Giving someone a loan is not exactly where I want to be. I want to give myself a loan. I don't want to have to go to get financing if I don't have to. I want to be able to self finance. And so some of those types of questions will come up to the market. And then I think something that largely causes lots of debate within a house is credit refunds and trying to influence behavior through it. And they're great practices, but they're not day one practices, right? Like credit refund models can add a lot of noise in trying to align price to value. So I highly recommend staying away from that on day one and thinking about the structure of just getting to a unit of measurement that's easy and predictable. Don't try to commonize it on day one. Try to create the process, set it up, get customers used to the workflow, then introduce the layers. But remember where you start and where you're trying to get so that you don't lock those degrees in getting there. And then I think the other thing is just understanding what it's going to take to implement, both from a product standpoint, because customers expect real-time data. They expect real-time tracking. And what most of you will run into is your current CRM and CPQ does not have product data in it. And so you have to integrate that back across. And so you have to think about some of these things and what it might take to get to a world that they have visibility and control. And another part that can cause some structural changes is thinking about freemium versus premium. How do you get to a freemium world that helps drive interest and engagement, but doesn't actually erase the value of paying for your good? How do you think about testing that? How do you think about experimentation? I mentioned it earlier. I think OpenAI is doing an amazing job of experimenting with new models and turning it over almost monthly at this point. It's crazy how fast they're moving and evolving. And then I think the last thing that I would say here is migration. Migration is a scary term, and the reality is OpenAI makes products better, right? AI agents make your productivity better. In most cases, it's not a standalone product. In most cases, it's actually an add-on to your product to make something else better. And so when you think about pricing that into your ecosystem of products, it's super important to think about how does it enhance the workflows? How does it make something better? And so something that I use when I think about these types of applications is I think, am I building a caddy to work with my individual or a co-pilot? Or am I thinking about running processes autonomously to remove workflows from my system? And as I start categorizing those things, it will really start to dictate how I think about values created.
Yeah, yeah. So, Brandon, I agree with everything you said. I just want to make a note, though, that back in the day when Slack was first being introduced. And I remember when I first got a credit notice from Slack that said you have unused credits from this month that are going to be rolled over to next month. I don't think they still do that, but back in the day they used to do that, and I thought, wow, what a great company. Man, I that increased my loyalty to Slack, 3x, and because it felt like they were recognizing me and they were giving me a gift. So. Uh, I think there's a lot of emotional dynamics at play in these credit systems that we're going to need to think out. But speaking of emotional dynamics, let's go on and take a look at some of the gotchas. So, Liam, next slide. What can go wrong with these systems?
I think it's a great question. This is probably where you should start before you start designing out. And I think learn from the market. A lot of people are going through this, so talk to your peers. I have the fortune of talking to a lot of companies just across the companion ecosystem, as well as other people that I work with in the market. And I think the first thing I think about is trying to do too much with a credit system too soon. It breaks the back end trust with your internal stakeholders. And you can add a lot of complexity that makes it really hard to adjust. So I would be really, really hard focused on trying to simplify how you do this on day one. Uh, the second thing that can be a big gotcha is thinking about how you structure that system and how it moves to phase two. So I'm going to give you an example of something that is a humongous gotcha for a lot of people. So when you move from a credit system that's tied to a seat to pooling, you introduce a lot of challenges from a rev rec perspective for how the product can actually consume the credits. It changes the UX. AI tends to be incredibly invasive with products. And so some of these design decisions that you make really early on can actually force you to build a new version of your product. And that's a scary thought when you think about your credit system forcing that. And so know where those are ahead and any of those roadblocks that can show up. Another one is over allocating capacity too soon. There's nothing like getting a product where you see you've used 15%, 10% of your capacity. There's nothing that drives churn faster. And it also erodes value because people will only pay for what they think they're going to use. And if you go too far into that capacity, or if you pool seeded value, this can happen too. And the reason is maybe you only have 30% of people that are going to use it on day one. Well, now you've created a whole user's value that's given away for free. And so I think those are interesting things. Revenue implications, how you design things like the credit period. Use it or lose it allows you to recognize that revenue at the end of the use it or lose it period. Something that also comes up with revenue is if it's over a 12-month time period, or if there's rollover, you have to have holdbacks for rev rec. And so oftentimes this can be something that you have to force into your design. So knowing those challenges ahead can be really helpful. Implementation. I mentioned this earlier. It can require you connecting product metrics into the CRM. Product people are usually not fond of this. It can be a lot of work in trying to get the APIs and the calls to work together. It can be messy. They like to keep it housed in their product. So is there a way to have it flow through, but still create a seamless integration across the entire ecosystem? Because what you run into as problems is you have a credit system for one product. How does it apply to the next set of products, and how do you work with that? And I think that's a really interesting area. And then the last one I'm going to say here is rep compensation. And I think this is one of the bigger ones for field sales models. Because if you move to a consumption model, they may not consume it. And you don't want that your rep compensation gets ahead of your own revenue streams. And so when you're starting to think about that, you have to think about how do you align your reps value and incentives with your customers value incentives and your incentives. And that's the magic of a pricing model, is when you can align all three of those things together. And so it's really important to just think about, okay, how does that work for a rep? And how is it going to incentivize against other products you sell? they're going to sell the thing that has the guarantee. They're not going to sell the thing that has an unexpected outcome. And so you have to balance against that. I've talked to a number of people that have started to introduce credit-based systems for a single product. And what they see is everyone still anchors in the other area. And so you have to think about how they go together. And this is one of the powers of seeding and how you build it into an ecosystem to create the understanding of how the two play together and create value for a rep too.
That point about the field sales is one that I think we're going to hear a lot of conversations about. I'm just going to give a quick example of something that I'm frustrated or I have been frustrated about. So, we vibe code apps using Lovable, and towards the end of every month, we start rationing credits. And you'll hear people saying things like, "Oh, I've got this big update I want to push, but I know that we've got this other update we want to do. We don't have enough credits to do both, so I'm going to hold back on my update to next month." I think this is an anti-pattern. Yeah, and I know that Lovable has probably designed this in as a way to get us to upgrade to the tier, upgrade a tier, but the jump is quite large. So, we have not committed to going up that tier yet. And the last few days of most months, we're left rationing credits. So I think there's an easy solution to this, which is allowing you to buy extra credits when you need to. But Brandon, what are your thoughts on this? Should the emphasis be on using this as a lever to get people to tier up? Or should we be more flexible and allow people to buy extra credits when they need to?
So I think you're raising a really good question here. I think you have to remember that the consumable is a really small dollar value. And when the consumable is a really small dollar value, the incentive to sell it or go through the transaction can be limited. So, especially in a field-based sales model, what you can end up with is asking a rep who sells $10,000, $15,000 deals to sell a Snickers bar on the side of the street. So what happens at the end of the day when you do that? They don't sell any of it. So it starts influencing a need to build self-serve add-ons and self-serve capacity management. The other thing that comes up, I think, is control. So, Stephen, if you had control over who could consume the credits and when, you may not feel that same way about rationing because you know the ROI of the credits that you're using. What happens today is you may not think all of the things that the team's doing are useful. So you have concerns when they start getting to the end of that workflow. But if you had more alignment to who's using it and you had identification, you might get more comfortable with a system like that. But I absolutely do believe that like pay-as-you-go structures, as well as prepaid capacity, is a really powerful concept to build across because it allows someone to discover. And I think the power of discovery is really fast. And it's going to drive quicker adoption for companies.
We could spend the rest of the time just talking about this, but I'd like to look at some of the other questions that we want to explore. So, Liam. So this is, I think, to some extent speculative right now. But is this part of the future? Are credits going to extend across vendors, especially for people like Agentforce that's building an ecosystem and the other large players that are building ecosystems of multiple agents, many of which, or not many, but some of which anyway, are going to come from third parties. So is this something that could happen, or is this just a bit of a pipe dream right now?
So I think the concept that you're referring to, we've seen it in the currency system itself globally. It's called dollarization, where you relinquish control in order to create common language to interact with your customer. And I think there's a lot of reasons that you could start to see this happen. For one, I think customers are going to get overwhelmed with the different number of credit systems they have to manage. And so if you're able to commonize on a system, it's going to allow for point solutions to play in an ecosystem. That's largely the case why you could look at why Ecuador adopted the dollar. They wanted to have currency they didn't want to have to do with going through the clearinghouse and going through all that. It's why a lot of these gaming applications, like I was saying, are willing to buy an OS to solve for the problem. It allows you to standardize, so you remove a lot of the questions about things. The challenge in getting here is that when you look at standardization across companies, that means that you're giving into the platform owning a share of your cost and a share of your revenue. And so if you think about something like an app store, so today Salesforce in their app store takes a part of your revenue. So the big players in the market have to establish themselves as the platform or agent platform of choice before this can happen. And once they become the default application and customers start to say, hey, I need this to happen, that's when you can see the world where dollarization can start to happen. Now, how that's going to credit and flow through systems, that gets really tricky. I think of the worlds like cloud infrastructure. Well, it's really easy to do that when it's based on storage capacity or cloud on gigabytes or the amount of data flowing through something. Or it's really easy to do when you're talking about data being monitored or data storage. But when you start getting into a world where maybe the metric's not commonized across, that gets tricky. Because then the tokening system gets weird to try to get to the value across a different area. Are you going to allow for the players that intersect with you to define their own transaction cost? Or are you going to control that centrally? How does that management influence your ability to align price to value? And I think a lot of those are going to be battleground states that will define whether or not this is possible. But I could see it happen. The question is, how far out is it? I think you'll see it in app stores. I think you'll see the platform players want to do this because it's amazing, right? You can basically scale your product without ever building it. And you've already seen this in different ecosystems. Salesforce did an amazing job with this to entrench Salesforce. And so companies understand the value that it creates for platform growth and platform stickiness. The question is what's going to force those different point solutions from doing it versus trying to disrupt the big platform player? And I think that's going to be the magic question that shows up.
Super interesting, Brandon. Is this a good point to go back to where what we were talking about early on and talk about the role of a currency or credit management system within the gaming space and some of the other lessons that can be learned from that?
Yeah, we can talk about the gaming space. We can talk about cloud infrastructure. I think those are probably the two that people are leaning on as reference points. And I think the company you don't want to become is LexisNexis. You don't want to look, for any of you who have looked at LexisNexis's pricing page, it's terrifying with all the different denominations of credits. It's scary. You don't know how many pages you can download for research. You don't know how to do anything, and you're terrified to act. That's like one of those things that I look across. And I think that they were one of the first to move in that direction. I can remember using LexisNexis in that way in college. And you pay a different rate for different types of papers or different types of things per page. But when I look at infrastructure, I think what's interesting about it is they were one of the first to say, hey, let's simplify, let's learn from the cell phone market, let's go to gigabytes, let's standardize what goes there. You saw it with the data monitoring group that did the same thing. And I think what they realized really early on is, hey, the granularity that I can get to via specific metrics isn't worth the complexity it introduces to the system. And it also introduces a harder time in skewing and building the backend systems behind things and management. It means that now I have to build product dashboards that have 1,000 different factors that are monitored. It also affects the way that people can flexibly use credits across the system. And so if you look at like any of the AWS, that type of ecosystem, a Datadog, one of the things that's really powerful is when you denominate something in gigabytes as opposed to in a specific type of workflow, is that different users may use things in different volumes. And it allows you to serve both equally because you can basically say you can use as many gigabytes as you need, like sign up for this, but you're flexible to use it on whichever workflow you need. And so I think that's one of the big lessons that I think about with the way that cloud infrastructure providers have played in this space. In the way that companies have layered on new workflows or new data observability. So I think of Datadog from earlier on in my days at OpenView, and Datadog was just a single monitoring system when it first got off the ground. But as they started layering different platforms that were in their observability structure, the flexibility was really king because, and they stumbled into it, but they were managing gigabytes. And so you could choose how you were playing across. And then over time, as they learn that one thing is worth more than another, you have the flexibility to then adjust how it's consumed in different areas. They haven't gone down that path, but other companies have. And if you look at like an Azure, you look at any of the other infrastructure providers, you do see a common currency. It costs different rates for different things, but it opens the door to get there. So that's how I would think about the infrastructure side. The second one that I would actually go to is not gaming here first. I would actually go to APIs here, Stephen. And I think Twilio and a lot of the earlier days application facing APIs did a really good job of helping people understand the value of pay on delivery or the value of pre-committing to a volume, but you only pay as you use it, and driving incentive structures to drive behaviors, and also driving pre-commitments so that you have expectations on what your revenue stream looks like. And I think with Twilio, it's a good example. They started off as phone, right? And they were accessing telephony, and then they went through SMS, and they started layering on a lot of different channels. But what's beautiful about it is it helps you understand the value of different channels and how they've denominated that. And they made it very, very simple early on. You first buy thing one, that's my gateway drug into drug two and drug three. And so once I get into your ecosystem, I'm locked in. I start using across that ecosystem. And so Twilio is a really good example where people could start plugging into their currency system, and you could see them as the API platform providing to the market. And then on the gaming side, I think the interesting thing that you come to here is that with gaming, what you see happening, like I said, is you have creatives, you have people that don't want to be doing this. And when you don't want to be doing something, you don't do it well. It's what I would consider something that's commoditized. There's a lot of things you would never build internally, or you shouldn't. You should never build your own CRM. There's too much good product in market. It's not going to be a competitive advantage for you from the ground up. Now, you may have things where you customize on top of it, or you may do things to make it work better, but you don't want to build from the ground up where something is just going to be a standard in the market. And so I think what I learned from gaming is, hey, how do I think about that scenario? How's that going to evolve in my market? What are going to be the standards? And how does that preclude me from where I want to go? And so when I think about gaming, that's the thing that I think about there. And I think about virtual currency and NFTs and things like that show up in gaming. Like, I want a magic wand, or I want some sort of like cape that I'm going to buy. And so people had to get comfortable with this idea of different things costing different amounts and not knowing how much currency was in circulation. And so they had to get comfortable with this scenario. And so you can look at gaming as a place where people start to work with tokens that are not worth $1. And so you start thinking about things that have differentiated value. And so I think you can look to the gaming system as a place where that happened with Roblox credits and all these different things. And just watch your kids, watch how they interact with something. Your kid's going to be the next buyer. And so if you watch how they're working through things, I think that can be a really powerful lesson.
Super important point. In my case, though, it's probably my grandkids rather than my kids. But um, so just to wind up here, let's expand our vision. I think we're going to ask Brandon to look into his crystal ball. So next slide, Liam. What could happen next? Do you have any sort of predictions or directions that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I'm going to share something that's going to go off on a little here. So I have a thesis that pricing implementation is going to fundamentally change in the future. And this thesis is basically that the idea that governance and control sits on top of the CRM in CPQ may not be a requirement in the future. What you may find is the CRM becomes data piping, but there's actually an agent layer that drives governance and drives flexibility for SKUs and how you manage, how it's used, how it categorizes revenue. And I think it's going to introduce the opportunity for something called a headless CRM. And so you could think about the CRM as the BIOS level of a computer and operating. And then you have an operating system that layers on top, like MS Office, that's sitting on top and controls most of the functionality and how things go. I can start to see orchestration layers developing in the CRM. I can start on top. And the beauty of this is there's no longer a direct engineering interface. Now, the question that comes into play there is, can you get to auditable controls where it's predictable? How does that scale across? I think that earlier stage companies should start experimenting with this sooner. I don't think the big companies are going to be the ones to do this. But I think it can be a 10x multiplier, maybe even a 100x multiplier, if you can really figure this solution out. And it's something that I'm super interested in. And I think it's still really, really early days to see if it's possible. But think of the power of building a dumb SKU. No brain. Put a price point on it. It's $1 million, whatever the price point is. But think if you were able to build an agent on top that actually dictated how you structure a deal around that, how you actually structure price for that, structure discounting. Well, that gives you a lot of control. It also shows you where things fall out. And so it allows you to design the data lake that you want to be able to understand exactly what the data is telling you. It also gives you the control from a contracting basis that's a lot simpler to get the revenue into the right pocket, to realize revenue in the right way. And so I think that there's a really important layer that you could see develop there. So that's my first one. The second one, I think Stephen already alluded to it earlier, which is I believe that platform applications that win and become the platform of choice as an agent platform are going to build open app systems. I think by definition, that's what makes them sticky. I think there's a lot more money in the game if you allow other people to build on top, because there's so many use cases that can be solved for, and you're just not going to have the ROI that you directly see to invest the resources to build applications in all those different directions. And so what you're going to see is they're going to have core applications they don't let people build from. But as you go to the right and left, you're going to allow people to build. And I think if you look at Salesforce and what they did, I think that's going to be replicated. You saw OpenAI announce this not long ago, but I think you're going to see it more within the platform AI structure. And so for example, I could easily see Agentforce starting to do this very soon as they go across the ecosystem and just allowing for orchestration apps to sit on top. But I think this is going to be true of all of the main platform players. And so as you start looking at the market, that's something to watch. As platform adoption starts to lean in one player versus another, that's the moment of truth when it can happen. And if the customers start screaming about the complexity of credits, you're going to see it happen even sooner. So that's a second thing they can pick up. And then the other thing is I can see host platforms selling the tokens to everyone in the arcade. So I can see a system where almost like Bitcoin, where something's out there and that becomes the currency that's circulated. And maybe there might be a player that is actually just the currency that's driving and controls the number of credits that are in the system. And I can see things like that starting to play out. And the question is what are the dimensions by which where that stops? Is it going to be just within a functional area? So like the CRM, or is it going to go across? And how is finance going to deal with that? And how fungible do they need the credits to move between different applications?
It's a super interesting world we're moving in, Brandon. I think you've surfaced enough ideas here for a couple of follow-up webinars. I hope we'll be able to have you back in the coming months. I apologize we ran out the time here and did not have time to engage with the Q&A and the conversation. But Liam and I will go through and pull out all of the questions in both the Q&A and the chat and pull them together into a blog post on the Abuka blog. We'll invite Brandon to comment on it, and we'll get that to you within the next week or so. Just want to give a huge thanks to Brandon. I think about this stuff all the time. I learned a lot this morning, and tremendous insights. So we will be sending out the recording, resources, an updated version of this deck that has Brandon's insights built into it. And until next time, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And let's continue the conversations in all the different channels that we have. So again, Brandon, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Stephen. It's been a pleasure. It's been a fun conversation. I hope to continue it in the future.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.